Welcome to Stories That Work. I am your host, Deacon Adam Roberts, and my guest today is Father Samuel Davis. If you could adjust your phone one way or the other, I'm not sure which. You're halfway in the screen.
Okay.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, that's better.
That's
okay.
good. And I've already made a mistake. We're like 30 seconds in. I already have to apologize. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about Father Raphael Morgan. I'm excited about this topic because the name of this show is Stories That Work. And this past weekend, I was with Father Samuel at this Brotherhood of St. Moses of the Light conference, and he talked about how he had a story that was important. And I knew right away that I wanted to have you on to share your story and why this story is important to you, because I live by stories. We live, we are a narrative life. And so I think the story that you're telling could be useful to other churches to learn this story and tell this story in their own churches. But the first thing I have to correct myself on, if you saw any of my postings online, I posted that Father Raphael was the first African-American Orthodox priest. He's actually Jamaican. So yes. I want to correct that now. Get that correction out of the way. That's just going to be the first of many mistakes I probably make related to this. But thank you for sharing your story about Father Raphael. It was very exciting. And obviously we don't have time to go into all of it. No. But I do want to give a plug. We just had, I think, in my opinion, that conference, this is my first time to go to the St. Moses of the Light conference, and it's one of the best Orthodox conferences I've ever been at.
Oh, that's awesome.
I think so. And I was convinced right away. I'm going to show here my support. I bought the t-shirt. So there it is. I love it. I've already worn it.
Okay.
I showed it to my kids. I explained to my kids who he is, why he's important, so they could understand and know, the story of St. Moses. So why don't you give, and for those who are used to our regular schedule, we normally come on at 1 p.m. Eastern. Okay. But Father Samuel, you're in seminary, and right. you've got a crazy schedule, so we're delayed a bit. I apologize, but this is such a good story that we needed to get out. So before we get into Father Raphael's story, why don't you share just a little bit about yourself for people who may not know you?
Okay, well, my name is Father Samuel Davis, as Deacon Adam did introduce. I came into Orthodoxy through the non-Chalcedonian Church. I believe this is going back now 7 years, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me right. I'm a former non-denominational itinerant pastor, I guess you can say. Outside of that, I've always had an interest growing up, the historic church. I'd always ask my parents, I think I shared this during my talk. My sister has Roman Catholic godparents, and we would always visit their home for nativity. And I would always ask questions on why was their service so different from ours. And of course, as a typical Protestant, I was told that it was just pagan, and these aren't Christian beliefs. And even as a child, it intrigued my interest, and I wanted to know more because obviously I knew that wasn't the correct answer. And, my interest in Orthodoxy really began with the preaching of a Vigante Archbishop by the name of Varan Ash. I was stationed in the United States Air Force at the time. I was serving at a naval air base in Keflavik, Iceland, and was flipping through the channels and saw him preaching on TBN, and I was so intrigued, not by the color of his skin, but because of the fact that there was a charismatic in a cassock with a pectoral cross around his neck. And it was very off-putting for me. It was the first time me seeing someone within my faith confession dressed like that. The sermon is on YouTube. It's called Prerequisites for His Presence. And this sermon ultimately changed my life. It instilled in me a desire to learn more about the Orthodox Church, and little did I know that years later that I would not only become an Orthodox Christian, but an Eastern Orthodox priest. I'm married. I have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, and we're all now working on building our mission parish in New Brunswick, New Jersey. You can visit our website, www.crossbearing.org. On our website, we actually have a tab available for any of you that are interested in learning more about Archimandrite Raphael's life, and there's also um, his icon. Of course, he's not canonized as saint yet, but it's a beautiful icon that's written by Constantine Labdas, a icon writer from Greece. So I would ask that anyone who's listening to this interview, and it will be in the future, to go check out our website and learn more about Father Raphael's life.
When we're done here, I'll put a link to that to the website in the comment section.
Sure, thank you.
I want to start off with two things, and then I'm going to let you lead us where we go. The first thing that I want to say is, because this is really, I think, more important than any of this, you're being obedient to your bishop.
Right, absolutely.
And your bishop is a pretty well-respected man
in
most circles. Archbishop Michael DeHulich.
Yes.
My archdiocese has a great working relationship with him. I think him and Bishop Thomas are hanging out all the time.
Very close friends. Yes.
Yeah, but Archbishop Michael is a respectable man. He's known he's known throughout many circles, and he has given you a directive related to Father Raphael Morgan. And as a clergyman, I expect you're being obedient. And so let's start there, and then we'll go in just ever so briefly that there is a little bit of what would say a controversy. We're not going to pretend like it's not there. And then we're going to go into why you tell why that story matters to you. And so we're just going to acknowledge, yes, it's there. We're not going to pretend like it's not. But the reason I'm having you on today is because I think the story that you're telling could be told in other churches and have a lot of value in those communities. So let's start with bishop, controversy, then story.
Absolutely. Okay, well, I'll go further back. St. Tikhon's Orthodox Theological Seminary has a Memorial Day weekend retreat. It was there 2 years ago that I had met our church curator and historian, Archpriest John Parish. And I was just asking him for some information on, the history of our church. How does that relate to the mission to America? And we actually talked about, how did that touch the Vagante confessions, which really had been connected to Native Black American Christianity. So it's not, in the Vagante movement, it's not so much former white Protestants that are attached to that effort. Excuse me one second. I don't know, you might hear my 3-year-old in the background.
I do.
Yeah.
It's good that you're a family man.
Yeah, thank you. And, he had shared with me, he said, look, I was a deacon at the time. He was like, Father Deacon, the success of your mission is going to be really based on the retelling of the story of Father Raphael Morgan. And I was like, I'd never heard of this man. And he said, you should check out some articles that have been written by Matthew Namey, even try to connect with Matthew. And Matthew and I were able to connect. And it was from there that I was really inspired to research Archimandrite Raphael's life. And this May, scouring through some information and going on Ancestry.com, we were able to find his burial place. So I had called Father John immediately, and I was like, I really believe that we found, Father Raphael's resting place. He lives a lot closer than I do. I believe Eden Cemetery is maybe 20 minutes from his house. So he went there before me, met with their curators, was able to confirm that this was the final resting place of Father Raphael Morgan. There was no marker. One of the issues was when Philadelphia was going through its first gentrification movements around the 70s, they had cleared some historic Black cemeteries and moved them to build high-rises. So Father Raphael does not have a marker. They made a marker that day. It was like a placard, stating that he was the first Black man to serve as a priest here in the United States, and he served at Holy Annunciation Greek Orthodox Church in Philadelphia. And with the excitement of all these findings, I had relayed a message to Archbishop Michael, and he gave us the direction of, look, you personally begin the intercessions to Father Raphael, and then encourage your speakers and members at St. Simon's to, do the different memorial services at his gravesite. So I believe this year, out of the 4 events, I believe we did 3 Panahida services at Eden Cemetery where he's laid. An icon was written, like I shared earlier, by Constantine Labdas. And since then, I mean, his story has spread beyond our mission, which I'm very grateful for. I'm thankful for. As you said earlier, Deacon Adam, I truly believe that this is not just a black story or something that should just be told by black clergy within the canonical church. After observing and examining Father Raphael's life, I really believe that he has a Catholic experience. It's something that touches all of America. So I'm hoping in the near future that other clergy will, jump on the wave, share his story, and even more so laity. I mean, this is something that we can all look to for inspiration on centrally, wanting to share the gospel and to share our faith and tradition in the Orthodox Church with others. That was like the main central focus for Archimandrite Raphael, coming from 3 different Protestant confessions and not having the experience of being received as a brother. I mean, he's serving as a missionary pastor, as the Protestant prior coming into the church during Jim Crow America. So although, he served in the Methodist Church, the AME Church, and I believe it was the Church of England also as well, seeing that it was smack in the middle of Jim Crow here in America, he was not permitted to serve in white churches. It's one of the very ugly realities of our nation's history. And he writes in his biography, and I believe this is found in Father Oliver Hervel's book, Turning to Tradition, on how, in his heart, he's looking for a community where he can be received as a brother, where he can not only serve alongside white clergy, but worship with and serve along with white clergy and laity. And it's just something that in our nation's history was not present at the time. I mean, sadly, even today, there are still some Protestant denominations and sadly, even some jurisdictions still in the church where this is an issue.
Well, I think one of the things that's impressive to me about his story is that any convert at that time in America, white or black or any background at that time, that was not a convert heavy time.
No.
So the fact that he found the faith, that he pursued it, the trips that he took, and we don't have time to go into all the trips, but he's been to more countries than I think I've been to states.
No, yes, a very well-traveled man. For him to go to Russia, Greece, Cyprus, Palestine, and I believe 3 other Middle Eastern countries, not to include the nations that he traveled as a Protestant missionary, missionary teacher, because he taught while he met his wife, and then even in his upbringing, I mean, he lived throughout the West Indies, Caribbean, and Central America. I mean, he actually was in his teens, was raised in my father's hometown of Colón, Panama. So that was like, for me, that was like our initial connection. It's like, this man could have spent time with some of my family members at the time, during my grandfather's life in Colón. So I initially got my familiarity with Archimandrite Raphael through his experience.
Well, it doesn't take long to do a little bit of research to find out that there was a divorce.
Yes,
and
huge controversy.
Yeah, so let's cover that. We have to keep it brief because I want to hear more about how this story is helping your church. And directly, I know that if I remember correctly, you have some new people at your church where this story made a difference. Yes, so let's go quickly through the divorce.
Okay, so I want to preface it by saying that the law in the federal government across the nation was that if anybody wanted a divorce from the years 1900 to 1930, there were three things that had to be proved or at least claimed in the court. One of them was neglect. Of course, we know during this time period, the Great Depression, Jim Crow, you have major financial issues for some families. So if a woman can prove neglect on the part of her husband, um, financial lack, if he's not providing for the family, or physical abuse, she could be awarded a divorce. The divorce deposition has been presented by American Orthodoxy. This was work that was done by Matthew Namey and Oliver Herbal. Uh, for me personally, when you're presenting information, everything within its context um, has to be presented. It's very easy to simply say, well, this guy had a divorce, and because of the claims of physical abuse, we automatically write him on and condemn him as a sinner. Number one, it's not in our tradition as Orthodox Christians to list the sins of a brother or a sister, whether reposed in the Lord or those or presently alive. Um, for me, it's about seeing what happened in his future. Obviously, Father Raphael had a spiritual father and had a hierarch that he was had to answer to. He was responsible to, and they made the judgment not to depose of him, not to excommunicate him. He's actually elevated to the position of archimandrite, which is the highest position that someone in the priesthood can get to outside of the episcopacy. And for me, that's the giveaway that these accusations were just made personally for the fact that Charlotte Morgan wanted out of her marriage. And there's also testimony um, throughout his ministry, even as a Protestant, that there was a constant contention between him and his wife concerning their marriage. He would have to, as a Protestant missionary pastor, he had to leave, I believe it was three different places that he ministered in once he was in his state because of the lack of support from his wife. And as I shared during my talk, I mean, that's a reality for many of our priests in the church or pastors outside of the church. You know, you dedicate your life and your vocation to the Lord. And a lot of times the realities of having to deal with full-time ministry is a lot for our families to deal with. I've heard countless stories of uh, pastors that I was formerly friends with while as a Protestant whose wives abandoned them or either shipwrecked their ministries because of them not wanting anything to do with full-time ministry. Or how many times has a pastor or a priest lost his children and they've not, returned to the church or wanted anything to do with the church because of their fathers not having a healthy balance where they're serving their parishes or their ministries and also giving adequate time for their families. So I believe all that has to be taken in consideration before making uh, an exact judgment against Archimandrite Raphael, especially where he's not deposed. I would believe that the church, and especially his hierarch, would be responsible enough to examine the situation and rightly judge, and especially that he didn't have a local bishop per se um, to make any judgments of his life. He was working directly under the ecumenical patriarch. So if we're going to condemn um, Archimandrite Raphael, we would have to also condemn the priests that supported him. That would be Father Demetrios Petrides in Philadelphia, Father Thomas Daniels, who served at the Greek Orthodox Church. I forgot the name of it. It's missing me right now at this point in D.C. and the Ecumenical Patriarch. If if American Orthodoxy, or excuse me, Orthodoxy in America is willing to go that far, that's up to them. But as for me and the other clergy and laity that have been dedicated to sharing um, Father Raphael's story, we're going to just continue telling the story.
But
Hmm.
let's be obedient to your bishop
Right,
and find
absolutely.
out why this story is making a difference in your parish.
Well, we recently, within the past 3 months, have added 4 catechumen to our mission parish, 4 black males. Um, All of them are anywhere between their late 30s to about the age of 50. Within these four young men, one was in the middle of his training to be formed as a Protestant military chaplain, and after hearing about Archimandrite Raphael's story and also learning about the church, actually put a hold on that and gave me a call. And I've been um, sharing the faith with him, I think, for the past 2 years, maybe. And he said, "Look, I can't do this anymore. I need to become an Orthodox Christian, especially that I want to serve as a chaplain in the armed forces." And he has done a great job so far. He's been faithful in the catechumenate, soaking up all the riches of our faith. The other young man, who's 50 years old, was actually one of my old youth pastors while I was in the Assemblies of God, and he would like to become actually monastic. And he's actually sat down with me and another gentleman about restoring the monastic order that Archimandrite Raphael began, the Order of Golgotha. The other two men, I don't believe, will be um, pursuing a vocation in the church, but they both shared with me the impact on how, among the saints of America, Archimandrite Raphael was very impactful to their decision to commit their lives to the church as now learners of being catechumens and learning what does it take for them to become and live a life as an Orthodox Christian. So I don't know if you can rack that on the list of miracles attributed to Archimandrite Raphael, but I think it's very impactful to know that his life has touched these four men and then coming into the faith.
Yeah, I think what's important here, something that I do want to spend a little time on,
Mhm.
is that the American Orthodox Church is convert heavy right now,
Right, absolutely.
and there's this battle that I went through myself of when you come in and you basically become like an Arabophile or Russophile, or
Yes.
right? And because, but and it's with good intentions. It's
Mhm.
you want everything that's Orthodox. You want
Right.
all of it. Like you've been missing out for so long.
Mhm.
You want to turn over every stone, right? And I get
Absolutely.
that, right?
Mhm.
And then the other side of that we've struggled with in our history, and I think it was the council in the 19th century that was the one that condemned ethnophilitism, that we have to be
Right.
careful, and
Mhm.
we can take that too far. And so we're trying to find that balance in America.
Mhm.
So, there are sadly some accusations that a heavy interest in Father Raphael is just philotism. We're
Mhm.
only interested because he's black.
Yeah, I've heard that a few times.
Right? Yeah.
Right. Mhm.
Yeah, I don't mind being interested because he's black. If he's the first
Mhm.
black priest in America, like that's a story
Mhm.
that I care about.
Mhm.
But there's more to the story than just him black.
Exactly.
There's some depth to the story.
Mhm.
And I don't think we can deny that there is some value. How much is where we have to be careful. It's finding
Exactly.
the balance. But there
Mhm.
is value in seeing people before us,
Mhm.
the cloud of witnesses that shared the same culture, that
Mhm.
shared the same heritage, that shared
Mhm.
the same, that knew what it like in my family, what it's like to sit around the dinner table, the
Absolutely.
heritage aspect. And so,
Mhm.
for Black America, it's a different heritage.
Mhm.
There's a lot of interweaving, there's a lot of similarities,
Mhm.
but, and so there's value there in baptizing
Mhm.
those parts of culture and seeing what Father Raphael did. So I don't know
Mhm.
if you want to address the concerns of philotism at all.
Well, absolutely. I would love to. I
Yeah.
mean, for me personally, I mean, I ethnically and culturally, my family is Afro-Latino. My parents are both Panamanian immigrants. I'm the first American born in my family. So for me, right off the bat, I mean, I'm not concerned with him being black, especially when you see that he's Jamaican born. So I'm not here, flag waving, um, looking to promote this man's story or his life simply off of the color of his skin. I'm not interested in that at all, especially as I shared with Father Damascene from Platina. I said, look, I said there are plenty of Black American heroes or heroes in American history that furthered Black interests that I would more readily hang my hat on to tell their stories if it was an interest of ethnic background or the color of this man's skin. For example, um, for the past 3 years, I've been reading the works of Dr. Claude Anderson with his fight of trying to restore some balance and interest into Black history here in America, but also, in other writings and reading of the life of John Brown. I mean, I would love for one day for our nation to establish a national holiday surrounded on John Brown's life. I was speaking, pretty much from my heart in my talk. I didn't use um, any notes on Saturday morning, and I completely forgot. And it might have been in good conscience that the Holy Spirit did not allow me to remember my closing point. But John Brown was a revolutionary in the sense of him fighting against racism, prejudice, and slavery. He absolutely hated slavery, and he led a very impactful slave riot. And he asked for the assistance of Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. And Tubman could not help him because she was dealing with some sickness at the time. But Frederick Douglass just said that he didn't believe that this revolutionary act was going to be impactful. So what he said at the time is an excuse not to support John Brown, and John Brown knew that he needed a paternal or maternal black figure to stand alongside with him in order to rally slaves within this slave revolt. 35 years later, Douglas admits that he enjoyed the life of being a black hero, but didn't want to be a black martyr. And when I read that, it pointed me back to Archimandrite Raphael's life, because when you read his story, his vocation is filled with obscurity. He's going up against Marcus Garvey at the time, W.E.B. Du Bois, who are just looking to satisfy the social needs of Black Americans at this time, where Archimandrite Raphael is speaking and proclaiming the gospel, which really it makes us whole. I'm not going to say that the gospel has that's going to bring about social change, in our country, but it brings revolutionary change of the heart, which is far more important. And both two have their place. But because of this, his voice being so radical and so different than what was being listened to at the time, just like the Old Testament prophets and the apostles, uh, his voice is dismissed. Black Americans are not apt to hearing what he has to say about the church at the time. They're, generally speaking, they're more concerned about seeing change in their everyday lives, and it's why Marcus Garvey had such a great following, and the same with W.E.B. Du Bois. But I mean, Garvey uses the Vagante African Orthodox Church as the official religion of his movement, and at the time there were 50,000 uh, Native Black Americans, West Indians, and Caribbeans from Harlem, New York, to Baltimore, Maryland, that were faithful members of this Bagante church. So, because of its attachment to Pan Africanism, that's where their success was 100 years ago. Well, 100 years later, there's only about 50 members left of the African Orthodox Church, and as any other Vagante confession, the majority of that 50 or 60 people are middle-aged clergy. So now we see where true success is that, does Archimandrite Raphael experience worldly success? No, he does not. He doesn't become a polarizing figure. But 100 years later, now with the retelling of his story, he's impacting so many lives today. I had shared some time with His Grace Bishop Neophotes of Mount Nairi in Kenya, and he shared with me that many of his brother hierarchs, the priests that are serving in the Patriarchate of Alexandria, attribute their faith back to Archimandrite Raphael. So this is like what I shared during my talk, is that Archimandrite Raphael unites the Black American experience, the American Orthodox experience, with that of the experience of what's going on in the Patriarchate of Alexandria. And like you said, when it comes to our family traditions, our cultural traditions, we need that. We need to be able to see, as Americans coming into the church, that we can trace back our Christian heritage to a point in our background culturally, but also we need to be able to unite that experience as an American to whatever the ethnic experiences of our jurisdiction, especially now today. I don't believe that we truly have developed an American experience among our jurisdictions here in America. I mean, I belong to the OCA. The OCA is still very much so a Slavic tradition. The Antiochians you can attribute to this. You can become a Middle Easterner in many ways because of its Middle Eastern background. We hear of the Grecophile um, experience and the Russian file experience that may happen in the OCA or in roll Corps. So we really haven't developed an American tradition yet. And I will always argue the point that our Commander Raphael's experience is not a black experience. It's an American experience. He's a Jamaican immigrant who becomes an American citizen. He serves the American church. Like many American priests, he's an ambassador for American Orthodoxy while representing the ecumenical patriarch um, to Native Black Americans and West Indians and Caribbeans, who he's trying to evangelize and bring into the church. But he's also representing the church on many of his missional trips to Palestine, to Cyprus, to Greece, and these other nations where he was preaching the gospel. And I mean, I don't know how can anyone deduce the idea that this is a movement that's based on ethnophilitism, and especially that personally, I just wasn't raised that way. I experienced a very international experience growing up, being the son of immigrants, where I'm growing up speaking English in school with other Americans, with other first generation Americans in Central Jersey. And I would come home to hear my parents speak in Spanish and to eat cultural foods that I would not eat normally with my friends in school. So this is like an experience that we all have um, as Americans. And I believe that Archimandrite Raphael speaks to that. And he shares that experience with all of us.
This conference this past weekend, Brotherhood of
Mm-hmm.
St. Moses the Black, and the story of Archimandrite Raphael reminded me, and this is what I told my kids right
Mm-hmm.
before I went to the conference. I'm going to be a little blunt, so forgive
Mm-hmm.
my bluntness.
No, it's okay. It's
They were
great.
asking about the conference, and they said, "Why are you going?" And I said, "Because we have failed to bring the Orthodox faith to Black America,
Mm-hmm.
Hispanic America,
Mm-hmm.
to Asian America. It's a white intellectual church,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a blunt way to say it. And I don't have
Mm-hmm.
time to nuance it and
Mm-hmm.
flesh that out. And I apologize, but
Mm-hmm.
demographically speaking, we are largely a white intellectual church.
Right.
So Father Raphael's story reminds me that God wants us to bring the gospel to everyone, and we need and that includes all of the demographics of America,
Mm-hmm.
everyone. And so this conference was a great reminder for that. It was an opportunity
Mm-hmm.
for me to talk to my children about that, about
Mm-hmm.
God's gospel is for all of mankind,
Mm-hmm.
not just the ones that we most closely associate with. And that
Mm-hmm.
as an American Orthodox church, we have to unite to bring the gospel to all of America. And
Mm-hmm.
so that means going into areas that are a little different. I'll close with this, and then I'll let you close with something. I heard Father Paul Abernathy in Pittsburgh once recently talk about this over the summer. Someone was
Mm-hmm.
asking about how how difficult is it to go into like a Black neighborhood as a white person and bring the
Mm-hmm.
gospel or bring ministry. And he said we have a long history of this in the Orthodox Church, of someone being completely different.
Mm-hmm.
You look at what Saint Herman, and Saint Innocent did in Alaska.
Right.
I mean,
St. Herman. Right.
yeah, they're like so different.
Mm-hmm.
But he said the key was, and I'm paraphrasing what he said, was if you go into a community with love, that you love them,
Mm-hmm.
that's the prerequisite. Not
Absolutely.
that you're the same ethnicity, but that
Mm-hmm.
you love them.
Mm-hmm.
And when that happens, they don't care that you're from where you're from.
Mm-hmm.
They just know that you love them and that you care about them.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's funny, like going back to me mentioning um, John Brown. I mean, that was his experience. During right before the Civil War. I mean, this is a white male who was emboldened to speak out and act. Because it's one thing for us to say that we're for something or to say that we're supportive of something. Words can be very empty and valueless. You bring value to what you have shared with action. And John Brown's a white male who gathered slaves around him to lead this slave revolt. I mean, and I it's so extreme, but I can liken that to us missionizing America. I think we really need to take in consideration before we send out a missionary or a team of missionaries to another nation is have these individuals share the gospel here in America first. I can't, we have to change our thinking concerning mission, where as Americans we're sending out missionaries outside of the country. And I think that has a lot to do with how we see ourselves culturally as Americans. We don't need the gospel. We're a quote unquote Christian nation. But I think this is why the life of Archimandrite Raphael is so important, is that he never ceased to tell the story of the gospel. He was constantly planting seeds and was so filled with zeal to share the Orthodox faith. And it's something that we all need to take in consideration. I mean, forget just um, missionizing Black Americans and Latin Americans and Asian Americans. I mean, the reality is that working poor whites and poor whites are just being forgotten in our country. I mean, St. Tikhon's is right outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania, and this is not the Scranton of 50 years ago, 60, 75 years ago, when these coal mining jobs were available, and at least the city had some type of financial stability because those jobs are there. These people are being forgotten. Once the money is gone out the city, the people go into despair. It brings about poverty, and then after poverty, drug use. So the opioid epidemic that hit the Black neighborhood during the 80s and into the early 90s have now hit the suburbs. It was criminalized then. Now it's a sickness. These are things that we have to examine ourselves, and reassess what we're doing when it comes to mission in America.
This is was not planned, but
Hmm.
you gave me a great segue to announce, and this is the first place I'm announcing this. I'm very
Hmm.
excited. I've dropped little hints along the way, but speaking of missionizing
Hmm.
and doing mission work, the Antiochian Archdiocese has organized domestic mission trips for
Hmm.
next summer. We will be going to Pittsburgh.
That is awesome
Uh,
news.
yeah, very
Hmm.
exciting. The registration is open as of today.
Hmm.
If you want to learn more about this domestic mission trip, you
Hmm.
can go to james218.com,
Hmm.
www.james218.com. When you get there, the verse is there in case you're not familiar with that verse. A
Hmm.
little something to do with faith and works.
Hmm.
Uh, and I hope that it went. And this service trip, this mission trip is different. I just want to say one thing about it.
Hmm.
Not separate that you from the fact that you get to spend the whole week with Father Paul Abernathy, who's
Which is
that alone
awesome.
is right
Hmm.
is exciting.
Hmm.
But we have specifically split the trip to be half service
Hmm.
and half training. So the
Awesome.
morning of each day, you'll go out and you'll do work in the Hill District
Hmm.
of Pittsburgh. Very important area to learn how to get involved with the community. And Father
Hmm.
Paul and his awesome team have done just amazing work of being involved in their community.
Awesome.
On the second half of the day, you're going to receive training on how to
Hmm.
take that and do it in your own community. You're
Awesome.
not just showing up for a week of work.
Hmm.
It's called Catalyst for Change in your community.
Okay.
So we want to make you guys a catalyst for change in your community. And so you're going to be getting that every afternoon. And so go there, james218.com. We
Hmm.
have very limited spots. We're just launching this next summer. It's our pilot summer.
Hmm.
We only have 20 spots for week 1 and 20 spots for week 2.
Okay.
You'll be on the ahead. So I'm so glad you talked about, like I said, I didn't plan this, but you talked
No.
about we got
No, we
to
have
do
to.
this.
It's
Yeah.
a big deal For me, I mean, personally, I mean, of course, it's because of the fact that I'm serving in a mission parish, but I've just been really dealing with this in my prayers, and it sparked for me, reading Saint John of Kronstadt and other missional um, figures that we have in the church, Saint Herman of Alaska, Archimandrite Raphael. I mean, the reality is that we really need to take this in consideration. Our country um, needs the gospel. People need a sense of hope, um, a sense of life and love, and you can only get the fullness of that um, in the gospel of Jesus Christ and in His church. I mean, this is one thing that I close with on the second day of retreat. Yes, there are aspects of racial reconciliation that we have to work through, things that we need to address systematically, whether that's in local laws, state laws, and federal laws. But the reality is that you only have the ultimate experience of racial reconciliation within the chalice of the Eucharist. And we see the beginning of that, in the New Testament church in the book of Acts, where you see people from every tribe, every nation are coming into the church. And, excuse me, there's no, I'm sorry, there's no difference between one another. And it's not, I mean, there was no idea of racial separation as far as prejudice or racism is concerned in the first century. The people were tribal, but to see that people ethnically and also when it comes to social status, people that are just refuse to adapt to the mind of the world and are stating, this is the mind of the church, this is the mind and heart of our Lord Jesus Christ. It's very impactful, and I think this is something that we need to go back to within the Orthodox Church.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on in your busy schedule, being a seminarian. For those of you that, yeah, for those who know that we delayed and you've stuck with us, thank you for coming in later in the day. We're not normally on this late in the day, but it was just such an important story to share. So I put links in the comment section, both to your website.
Thank you very much.
Crossbearing.org, which has the story of Archimandrite Raphael Morgan. I've also put a link to our mission trips that the Antiochian Archdiocese. This is open to everyone. You don't have to be Antiochian. We're just the ones organizing it. And that's james218.com. And I have just a one-off question. It's a little bit of a rabbit trail. If we now know who the first Black priest was in the Americas, I'm curious who the first monastic was.
Oh, that was Archimandrite Raphael also.
He was both.
Right, he was both, yes.
It's a 2-for-1.
Right, 2-for-1 deal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, all right. Well, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Deacon Adam. God bless you.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you this weekend. I look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.